Well, they're actually pretty equal in a lot of ways. But, hey guys, this is JP's LEGO Reviews. Today, I'm going to be comparing the LEGO UCS Slave 1 to the LEGO Star Wars Tie Fighter. So, we're going to look through the displayability of them, how realistic they are, the value proposition, the building experience, and finally, the minifigure selection of these two sets. So, let's break it down. Now, let's talk about displayability. In my opinion, the most displayable set here is actually both of them. The reason why I say that is because they both look equally displayable. Now, they both are designed to be displayed, and they both look fantastic to display. And with both of these sets, they look good from all angles. LEGO have really considered every single side you would possibly look at both of these sets from. And because of that, these two LEGO sets have the same amount of displayability because LEGO have really thought about everything with both of these sets. Now, let's move on to the realism. Now, when it comes to how realistic these two sets look, firstly, they both look very realistic. But, is there a winner? I don't really think so. And the reason why is because the Slave 1 has practically the perfect shape for what LEGO can actually do, and the TIE Fighter really does lend itself to being built well in LEGO, but what does let the TIE Fighter down is the blockiness of the bridge section of the TIE Fighter where the cockpit is, because if it was just the wings by themselves, they'd win really easily because they've nailed it. But with the Slave 1, there's a few sort of small inaccuracies, but they don't really compound enough to make one or the other just more unrealistic. They're kind of on the same level here. So yeah, let's move on to the value proposition of these sets. Now, this is another really difficult sort of category to go through because both of these sets, when they were released, are exceptionally good value. Now, both the TIE Fighter and the Slave 1 in the US were $200 US. Meanwhile, in Australia, the TIE Fighter was $280. Meanwhile, the Slave 1 was $300. But which one actually has better value? That's a really difficult thing to pick simply because they both are really similarly valued, and they're both quite good value for money too. But looking at them, say, from the US perspective, and even from Australia's perspective, you do get slightly more with the Slave 1. So I'm going to give it to the Slave 1 simply because the experience of the build, which I'll go into depth in the next sort of category, but it's a more richer experience. You also get 3 more minifigures, which is also a big plus of the Slave 1. You get 200 or so more pieces, but the TIE Fighter is larger, so it kind of just balances out for the Slave 1 ever so slightly. But the TIE Fighter is really good value for money too. Back then, today, obviously I wouldn't really recommend you buying either of these sets simply because they're too expensive. But let's move on to the building experience of both of these sets. When it comes to the building experience, the Slave 1 wins it outright. The reason why is the TIE Fighter wing sections can get a bit repetitive because you're dedicating so many of your parts to building the wings, which look identical. And then you have the sort of cockpit area where it kind of snaps in like a sandwich, and it's an okay build. There's very few interesting, well, not very few, but there are quite a few interesting building techniques. But the Slave 1 really has a much more captivating build because you're building so many different things. Like you may be starting with, say, the base, you're building that up, but you're also adding detail to the underside too. Then you go onto the cockpit area, then you go onto where Han's carbonite goes, and then you're moving on to the wings that kind of fold in and out depending on the rotation of the set. Like, there's just a lot more actual things here that you can play around with the Slave one. There's a lot more you can build with as well. And what this set does, it just makes for a better building experience and a more enjoyable building experience. Now, let's move on to the minifigures of these sets. So, the TIE Fighter is a very detailed minifigure, and so is Boba Fett. So, by themselves, these two minifigures would be equal. So the Slave one's an obvious winner here, because you get a Stormtrooper, a Cloud City Trooper, Officer, and Han Solo. Plus you get Carbonite. And for that amount of minifigure, there really is no comparison. The quality of the minifigures are both excellent, but the Slave one wins simply because there's just more variety. And that's what makes it more interesting. Now, let's move on to my final thoughts on both of these sets. Now, what are my final thoughts on these two sets? Well, they're actually pretty equal in a lot of ways. But because the Slave one won 3 categories, I have to give it to the Slave one. It did win the comparison. But these two are some of LEGO's best ever UCS sets in my opinion. And these two, in my opinion, are very close to the pinnacle of LEGO UCS sets. They both are brilliantly built. They are brilliant to display, brilliant value for money. You just have so much in both of these sets. And if either one was available today, I wouldn't even recommend it without even a shadow of a doubt. They're both brilliant. But what can you get today? Well, you can get the A-Wing Starfighter. I think that's still available. It could be retired, but that's definitely a good set to get. Apart from that, there's you have to spend a lot more to get quite a bit of quality here. The R2-D2 is pretty decent for 380 Australian dollars, or I believe 250 US dollars now. Also, yeah, and then with the good quality UCS sets, in my opinion, you have to go quite a bit up in price. You have the gunship for 600 Australian dollars. Then you have the Razor Crest, which is even more expensive. But these two are absolutely brilliant LEGO UCS sets. Let me know if you have these, and let me know your thoughts about this comparison. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button. If you want to see more content just like this, then please subscribe. I hope you have an awesome day and keep building.